Newport Jazz Festival, Rhode Island, 1965. July, backstage, two legends. One confrontation. Louis Armstrong was 64 years old, Miles Davis was 39. Two different generations. Two different jazz philosophies, two different worldviews. Louis was the father of traditional jazz, smiling, beloved, embracing everyone. Miles was the face of modern jazz, angry, revolutionary, compromising on nothing. For years, Miles had been criticizing Louis, publicly. In interviews in magazines, called him Uncle Tom, said he was grinning for white folks, old-fashioned, taking jazz backward. Louis had never responded, stayed silent, stayed patient. But that day, backstage, everything changed. Miles saw Louis in the hallway. Stopped, that familiar look of disdain on his face, walked toward Louis. Stopped, looked at him. And then said something cruel, something arrogant. "You're not a legend, Louis. You're a relic. I'm the real legend. I changed jazz. You just entertained." Silence. The backstage area froze. Everyone waited. What would Louis do? Would he get angry? Would he fight back? Louis smiled. That famous Louis Armstrong smile. But there was something in his eyes. Sadness, wisdom, understanding. And then Louis spoke, softly, but powerfully. What he said that day changed Miles Davis forever. 20 years later, Miles Davis cried, 1989, at home, alone, listening to a Louis Armstrong recording, What a Wonderful World, recorded in 1968, one of Louis' last major hits. Miles heard it now, really heard it, the wisdom in Louis' voice, the hope, the love. He hadn't heard it in 1965, because he was too angry, too arrogant, too young. But now he was 53 years old. Life had humbled him. Success had humbled him, loneliness had humbled him, and he realized Louis had been right about everything. Revolution mattered. Miles had changed jazz, had broken sound, had redefined art. But how many lives had he changed? How many kids had he inspired who had nothing? How many times had he smiled when his heart was breaking so the audience could feel joy? Miles knew the answer. Not enough, because he'd been too busy being revolutionary, too focused on breaking things, had forgotten about building, about healing, about touching. Louis had never forgotten, and now Louis was gone. 1971, 8 years ago. Miles had never told him. "You were right. I'm sorry. Thank you." Now it was too late. But Miles could speak to the world, could tell the truth, could honor Louis's legacy, and maybe, just maybe, could teach another young, angry musician that being a legend isn't just about breaking things. It's about touching people, about healing, about love. But what had happened that day in 1965? What had Louis said that haunted Miles for 20 years? And why did it take Miles 2 decades to understand what Louis had tried to teach him? Before we explore this powerful story of wisdom versus arrogance, legacy versus revolution, and the lesson that took 20 years to learn, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. What Louis Armstrong taught Miles Davis that day will change how you think about success, art, and what it means to leave a lasting legacy. To understand that backstage confrontation in 1965, we need to go back, to understand both men, their journeys, their struggles, their philosophies. Louis Daniel Armstrong was born August 4th, 1901, New Orleans, Louisiana, into crushing poverty, into a world that told black people they were less than, that their music was noise, that their dreams didn't matter. Louis faced racism every single day, from childhood, from white society, from police, from employers, from everyone. But Louis developed a strategy, a philosophy that many people, including Miles Davis, would later misunderstand. Louis smiled, not because he was happy all the time, not because he didn't feel the pain of racism, but because the smile was a weapon, a strategy, a way to disarm white audiences, to make them comfortable enough to actually listen to his music, to open doors that would otherwise stay locked. Louis understood something crucial, that in 1920s, 30s, 40s America, a black man showing anger would be shut down immediately, would be seen as threatening, would lose opportunities. But a black man who smiled, who entertained, who made white people feel good could slip through the cracks, could get on stages, could make records, could reach millions, and once you had that platform, you could change things. Slowly, carefully, but surely. Louis never forgot where he came from, never forgot the poverty, the hunger, the discrimination. And he never forgot that for every door he opened, 100 young black musicians could walk through. Throughout his career, Louis helped countless young artists, gave them chances, gave them stages, gave them advice, taught them not just music, but survival. How to navigate a racist industry, how to maintain dignity while dealing with indignity, how to change the world without getting destroyed in the process. But by the 1960s, a new generation had emerged. Young black artists who were tired of smiling, tired of making white people comfortable, wanted revolution, wanted to demand respect, not earn it through entertainment. And they looked at Louis Armstrong, still smiling, still entertaining, and saw him as a relic, as someone who had sold out, who had compromised his dignity for success. Miles Davis was born May 26, 1926, 25 years after Louis. Came of age in a different era, had opportunities Louis never had, could attend Juilliard, could play in integrated bands, could speak his mind more freely. Miles was brilliant, innovative, revolutionary. Changed jazz multiple times throughout his career, from bebop to cool jazz to modal jazz to fusion. Miles refused to smile for white audiences, refused to announce his songs, refused to play the role of the grateful entertainer, turned his back to the audience while performing, made white people uncomfortable on purpose, and Miles saw this as progress, as dignity, as what Louis should have done all along. The information in this video is compiled from documented interviews, archival news, books, and historical reports. For narrative purposes, some parts are dramatized and may not represent 100% factual accuracy. We also use AI-assisted visuals and AI narration for cinematic reconstruction. The use of AI does not mean the story is fake, it is a storytelling tool. Our goal is to recreate the spirit of that era as faithfully as possible. Enjoy watching. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Miles publicly criticized Louis. In interviews in magazines, called him an Uncle Tom, said he grinned like a slave for white people, said his music was outdated, said he was holding jazz back. Louis heard these criticisms, read them in magazines. Friends told him what Miles was saying, but Louis never responded publicly, never fought back. Some people thought Louis was weak, that he couldn't defend himself, but those who knew Louis understood. He wasn't silent because he was weak, was silent because he was wise, knew that fighting with Miles would accomplish nothing, would just create division in the jazz community, would give critics ammunition to dismiss both of them, but silence had a cost. Louis felt the pain of Miles's words, felt betrayed, had spent decades opening doors for young black musicians like Miles, had endured humiliation and compromise so the next generation could have it easier. And now, that next generation was calling him a sellout, calling him a clown, not understanding the strategy, not appreciating the sacrifice. By 1965, Louis was 64 years old, had been performing for nearly 50 years, was tired, not just physically but emotionally. The constant travel, the performances, the smiling when his heart was breaking, the maintaining of the image was exhausting. Louis's health was declining, heart problems, high blood pressure. Doctors told him to slow down, to rest, but Louis kept performing, kept touring, because the music was his life, his purpose, his way of touching people. In July 1965, both Louis and Miles were scheduled to perform at the Newport Jazz Festival, the premier jazz event in America, held annually in Rhode Island. The festival represented the diversity of jazz, traditional artists like Louis, modern innovators like Miles, everything in between. Louis arrived at Newport with his band, was scheduled to perform on the main stage, looking forward to it, but also anxious. Knew Miles would be there, knew there might be tension. Louis had always tried to avoid confrontation, preferred harmony, preferred peace, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen. Miles arrived separately, with his quintet. Young musicians, cutting-edge sound. Miles was at the peak of his powers, confident, some would say arrogant, knew he was changing music, knew he was important, and felt no need to show deference to the old guard, even Louis Armstrong. The festival backstage area was crowded, musicians, managers, technicians, press, everyone moving with purpose, getting ready for performances. Louis was in his dressing room, preparing, warming up on his trumpet, thinking about his set, about the audience, about making them happy. Miles was in a different area, also preparing, But his preparation was different, was thinking about innovation, about pushing boundaries, about proving he was the future of jazz. Have you ever had someone you respected criticize you unfairly? How did you respond? Share your experience in the comments. Around mid-afternoon, Louis left his dressing room, needed to speak with the stage manager about his set time, walked down the hallway, carrying his trumpet case, moving slowly. Age and health taking their toll. Miles was coming from the opposite direction, also heading to see the stage manager. The hallway wasn't wide. They would have to pass each other. Louis saw Miles approaching, considered turning around, going a different way, but decided against it, had nothing to be ashamed of, had done nothing wrong. Miles saw Louis. Face hardened, stopped walking, stood in the middle of the hallway, waiting. Louis approached, smiled that Louis Armstrong smile. "Hello, Miles. Good to see you." Miles didn't smile back, just stared, then spoke, voice cold, dismissive. "Louis. Still doing the same old thing, I see." Louis's smile faltered slightly, but recovered. "We all do what we do best, Miles. You play your way. I play mine." Miles shook his head. "That's the problem, Louis. You're stuck in the past. Jazz has moved on." "You haven't." Louis felt the sting, but stayed calm, kept his voice gentle. "Jazz is big enough for all of us, Miles. Traditional and modern. There's room for everyone." That's when Miles said it, the words that would echo for 20 years. "You're not a legend, Louis. You're a relic. I'm the real legend. I changed jazz. You just entertained." The hallway went silent. Other people nearby heard, stopped what they were doing, turned to watch, waiting for Louis's reaction. Louis stood very still, processing what Miles had said, felt the pain, deep pain, not just from the words, but from who was saying them. A young black musician, someone Louis had helped pave the way for, someone who should have understood, but didn't. Louis looked at Miles, really looked at him, saw the anger, the arrogance, the conviction, and saw something else, saw himself. 40 years ago, young, talented, convinced he knew everything, before life had taught him humility, compassion, wisdom, Louis made a decision. Wouldn't get angry, wouldn't fight back, would teach. The way he'd always taught, with kindness, with truth, with love. Please subscribe if you want to see how Louis's response changed everything. The most powerful moment is coming. Louis took a slow breath. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but filled with something. Not anger, something deeper. Wisdom. "Miles," he said, "you think being a legend is about being revolutionary, about changing sound? That's art, and you're brilliant at it. Nobody can take that away from you." Miles looked surprised, had expected anger, defensiveness, not praise. But Louis continued, "Being a legend isn't about you, Miles. It's about the people you touch. How many lives have you changed? Not jazz, lives. How many kids have you inspired who had nothing, who saw you and thought, maybe I can do something too? How many times have you smiled when your heart was breaking so the audience could feel joy? Could forget their pain for a moment?" Miles's face hardened again. "I don't need to smile, Louis. I make real art, not minstrel shows. The words were designed to hurt. And they did." Louis felt them like physical blows, but didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Instead, stepped closer to Miles, looked him in the eyes. "Miles," Louis said, voice still gentle, "you're angry because you think I sold out. But I didn't sell out. I bought in. Bought into the idea that music can heal, that joy matters, that making people happy isn't weakness, it's strength." Miles started to respond, but Louis raised his hand. Gently. Not to silence, just to ask for a moment more. "You think my smile makes me less of an artist?" Louis continued. "Let me tell you about that smile. I smiled through poverty you can't imagine. Smiled through racism that would have broken you. Smiled when people called me boy and worse. Smiled when I couldn't eat in the restaurants I performed in. Smiled when I couldn't use the same bathroom as the white musicians I played with. You know why I smiled, Miles? Because that smile opened doors for me and for you." Louis's eyes were filling with tears now, but his voice remained steady. "Every time I smiled and made a white audience comfortable, I was making it possible for you to not have to smile. Every time I entertained when I was exhausted and heartbroken, I was creating space for you to be revolutionary. You think you changed jazz on your own? You changed jazz because I and others like me made it possible for you to even be in the room." Miles stood frozen, Silent. Something in Louis's words had penetrated. The backstage crowd was completely quiet, everyone listening, everyone feeling the weight of this moment. Louis continued. You call what I do entertaining like it's a dirty word. But entertaining people, giving them joy, helping them forget their pain for a few minutes, that's sacred work, Miles. That's healing. You make beautiful, challenging art. And that's important, but I touch hearts. I make people feel loved, feel valued, feel human. That's legend, not because of what I did for myself, because of what I did for others. Miles's jaw was tight, eyes distant, processing. Louis stepped even closer, put his hand on Miles's shoulder. You're a genius, Miles. Don't let bitterness steal that from you. You'll understand one day when the anger fades, when you realize that legacy isn't what you did for yourself, it's what you did for others. I changed sound, you touched hearts. And in the end, hearts last longer than sound. Louis patted Miles' shoulder, then walked past him, down the hallway, leaving Miles standing there, speechless, broken down, not with anger, but with truth. Miles didn't move for several minutes, just stood there. People around him slowly returned to their activities, giving him space, but watching, wondering what he was thinking, what he was feeling. Later that evening, both men performed. Louis first, went on stage, smiled, played, made 70,000 people happy, made them forget their troubles, made them feel the joy of music. Miles watched from the wings, couldn't help it, watched Louis work the crowd, saw the love the audience had for him, saw how Louis gave everything, even when he was tired, even when he was hurting. Saw what Louis had been trying to tell him. When Miles performed later, his set was brilliant, as always, innovative, challenging, beautiful. But something was different. For the first time, Miles felt a twinge of doubt, not about his music, but about his philosophy, about what he'd been saying, about Louis, about legacy. After the festival, Miles and Louis didn't speak again, not at Newport, not for years afterward. Louis continued performing, until his health finally gave out, passed away in July 1971, 70 years old. Miles heard the news, felt something, loss, regret, but also confusion. Still wasn't ready to admit Louis had been right. The 1970s passed. Miles continued innovating, continued pushing boundaries, had success, had struggles. But always in the back of his mind, Louis's words. I bought in. Hearts last longer than sound. What you did for others. By the 1980s, Miles was in his 50s, had lived through a lot, drug addiction, health problems, relationship failures, professional conflicts. Life had humbled him in ways he never expected, started thinking differently about legacy, about impact, about what really mattered. In 1989, Miles gave an interview for a jazz magazine. The interviewer asked about Louis Armstrong. Miles, you criticized Louis pretty harshly back in the day. How do you feel about him now? Miles paused, long pause, thinking, remembering. That day at Newport, Louis's words and his own arrogance finally spoke. Louis was right. Interviewer was shocked. Miles Davis admitting he was wrong was rare, almost unheard of. Could you elaborate? The interviewer asked. Miles took a deep breath. I was young, angry, arrogant, thought revolution was everything, thought changing the sound was all that mattered. But Louis taught me something that day at Newport. Took me 20 years to understand it, but he was right. Legend isn't about breaking rules, it's about touching souls. I broke sound, Louis touched hearts, and in the end, hearts last longer, the interviewer pressed. What changed your mind? Miles looked away. Voice quiet. Life, loss. Realizing that all the innovation in the world doesn't matter if you don't connect with people. Louis connected, with everyone, made them feel loved. Feel valued. Feel human. That's bigger than any musical revolution. I wish I'd told him. Before he passed, that he was right, that I understood, that I was sorry. Miles wiped his eyes. That interview was published. Jazz community was stunned. Miles Davis, the revolutionary, the innovator, the man who never apologized, admitting Louis Armstrong was the real legend. The story spread. Musicians talked about it. Journalists wrote about it. People who'd been at Newport in 1965 remembered that backstage confrontation. Remembered Louis's words, remembered Miles standing there speechless, realized they'd witnessed something profound, Louis's wisdom breaking through Miles's arrogance, truth penetrating pride, love defeating bitterness. Miles lived until September 1991, 65 years old. In his final years, often spoke about Louis, with respect, with admiration, with regret that he'd understood too late. In one of his last interviews, Miles said something remarkable. When people ask me what I'm most proud of in my career, they expect me to say Kind of Blue or Bitches Brew or some album. But what I'm most proud of is finally understanding what Louis tried to teach me. That art without love is just noise. That innovation without compassion is empty. That being a legend means touching lives, not just changing sound. I wish I'd learned that lesson earlier. Could have done more. Could have been better. But at least I learned it. And I can teach it. Pass it on, the way Louis tried to pass it to me. Today, decades later, the story of Louis and Miles at Newport is jazz legend, taught in music schools, written about in books, referenced in documentaries, the confrontation where wisdom met arrogance, where an old man taught a young genius the meaning of legacy. Students analyze what happened, why Miles was angry, why Louis responded with kindness, what it means for how we think about art, success, and impact. The lesson resonates beyond jazz, beyond music. It's about how we measure success, what we value, what we leave behind. Miles changed jazz multiple times, was innovative, revolutionary, important. But Louis changed lives, made people feel valued, gave them joy in dark times, opened doors for others. That's why Louis Armstrong is still beloved, still celebrated, still remembered with love, not just for his music, but for who he was, how he treated people, what he stood for. Miles Davis is respected, admired, studied. But Louis Armstrong is loved. That's the difference. That's what Louis was trying to teach Miles, that being loved, touching hearts, changing lives, that's the highest achievement, that's true legend. The trumpet Louis played at Newport in 1965 still exists, in a museum, with a plaque telling the story of the day Louis taught Miles about legacy. The recording of Miles's 1989 interview is preserved, his voice cracking when he admits Louis was right, physical evidence of pride breaking, of humility emerging, of wisdom finally penetrating. The lesson Louis taught that day extends to all of us, in whatever field we work, whatever art we create, whatever impact we hope to have. We can be revolutionary, can break boundaries, can change industries, and that matters. But if we don't touch people, if we don't make them feel valued, if we don't spread love and joy and hope, then what's the point? Innovation is important, but compassion is essential. Breaking rules matters, but healing hearts matters more. Being brilliant is an achievement, but being kind is a legacy. Louis Armstrong understood this, lived this, even when people misunderstood him, even when they called him a sellout, even when young musicians like Miles attacked him. He stayed true to his philosophy. Love heals. Joy matters. Touching lives is the highest calling, Miles Davis eventually understood. Took 20 years, required life to humble him, required losses and pain and time, but he got there, admitted Louis was right, and in doing so, honored the man who tried to teach him. Thank you, Louis Armstrong, for the music, for the joy, for the wisdom, for teaching us that legend isn't about what you do for yourself, it's about what you do for others, for showing us that smile isn't weakness, it's strength, that entertaining isn't selling out, it's healing, that making people happy isn't less important than being revolutionary, it's more important. And thank you, Miles Davis, for your brilliance, for your innovation, for your honesty, for admitting when you were wrong, for learning the lesson, for passing it on, for showing us that it's never too late to understand, to grow, to honor those who came before. Two legends, two philosophies, one profound truth. In the end, hearts last longer than sound. Love outlives innovation, and the greatest legacy is the lives you touch, not the rules you break, forever